the thing with comfort zone, I think you talk about this a lot in the show, is comfortable doesn't mean we like it. Comfortable
Mhm.
doesn't mean we're happy there. It doesn't mean it's great. It
It's
means it's
easy.
the easier route, the safer route.
Welcome back to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award winning journalist, a mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This podcast is brought to you by the Mail Tribune. You can find more podcasts at mailtribune.com. Hey, I want to tell you about something really exciting I made for you. I have a hip habits freebie for you. It's 4 weeks of habits to help you with your relationship with your phone, everything from a digital detox to setting boundaries and to curating your feed. You can find the link to get that free download in show notes. Let's get to today's guest. Today, you are going to be hearing from Lia Garvin. She is a career expert and operation leader for influential companies like Microsoft, Apple, and Google. She's featured as an expert in Forbes, Business Insider, and CNN Business. She's also the author of Unstuck, Reframing Your Thinking to Free Yourself from the Patterns and People That Hold You Back. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you may be stuck, how you can start to get yourself unstuck, working through things like your inner critic, comparison, and someone else's feedback. And she's going to help you start challenging yourself with helpful questions rather than questions that are not helping. Let's get to it. Lia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited.
We're going to jump right in. So, you wrote Unstuck, Reframe Your Thinking to Free Yourself from the Patterns That Hold You Back. Was there a time in your life that inspired that?
Ooh, I mean, a time, I would say a
That
lot
is
of
life.
times. Yeah, life, all of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I've worked in the corporate world for almost the last 10 years, or over the course of, since becoming an adult, for quite a long time. And I think as a very ambitious, driven person, still got those tendencies. I guess, elder millennial or a geriatric millennial, but still got those tendencies of like wanting things to go faster and be, successful now, and a little bit of impatience, a little healthy impatience. Um, I ran into feeling like, at certain points in my career, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how good of work I was doing, how much great feedback I was getting, how good of a relationship I had with my manager, I still felt stuck. Like I
Mm.
wasn't pushing through to that next level of my career. And in the last few years, as I started doing more and more women coaching, sorry, more and more work coaching and mentoring other women, I found, oh, wow, I am not alone in this. And this was something that I was seeing showing up a lot, not just for women, but it showed up differently for women in the workplace because of all of the biases and double standards and stereotypes that we have to contend with, and certain things that we've been socialized to believe or not believe based
Mhm.
on our upbringing. And so I said, hey, wait a second, I'm not the only person feeling stuck. There's some sort of things that are holding us back over and over. And that's where the origin story became of the book.
Mhm. Before I ask the next question, I do want to say I don't think we should go with geriatric millennial. I think we got to stick with elder millennial. I think that just feels better all around.
I know. I'm like, what? Seriously. It's so funny. I mean, talk about like, language to make us feel bad. But
I know. I know.
yeah.
My brother is 10 years younger than me and he is technically a millennial. And it's funny because our life experience was so different. The
Yeah,
technology advancement in those 10 years was so wild.
totally.
Okay, so you have this aha moment that I'm not the only one going through this, and a lot of people are dealing with it. As you started working with women to get unstuck, what did you notice that was keeping people held back the most?
Yeah. So what I started to notice was, um, we were surrounded by these sort of, you know, things that were believed to be true. So beliefs like, don't brag, don't show off, good work
Hmm.
gets noticed, don't talk about money, all these things that then we would internalize and believe them as, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. And I mean, let's be honest, if we don't talk about money, what's the result? We get less of it. Like
Hmm.
literally. And so if we don't talk about our work, it doesn't get seen. And so I started to see that. the more we internalize these limiting beliefs, the more they held us back. And then the more stuck we'd feel. And over time, when you feel stuck, you know, for a long period of time, you start feeling like, well, there must be something wrong with me, or, you know, I'll never be able to do this thing. And it becomes a really self-reinforcing vicious cycle that that can also be really isolating. And so part of wanting to talk about it was wanting to say, hey, you're definitely not alone feeling this way. And there's actually some things that we can do to start feeling unstuck and to be pushing against these limiting beliefs.
When I was first entering the workforce, my example was my dad. And so I was very much acting like my dad did in the workforce and what I saw from
Yeah,
him, what I learned from him. And even though I didn't initially have those limiting beliefs, everybody else had them about me. And so as a woman in the workforce acting like a man, that had its own repercussions as well.
absolutely. And I love that point, because I would say I had a similar experience where once I entered the workforce, I was like, wait a second, you know, all these things that, like, you know, I didn't even realize had
Hmm.
been, you know, because I think we start to, like you say, even if we didn't have those, like I like to say, I didn't have imposter syndrome before I started working corporate, but like 2 hours later, I had it like really strong,
Yes.
you
Hmm.
know, and I think, yeah, we can quickly start to see, oh, this is the perception of me and what I should do. And I think one of the realizations from reading a lot of different books around, you know, leadership development for women and career development, they often say to, you know, potentially do things in a way that don't feel authentic to you, or just like, hey, try to do the thing that the dudes are doing because it's working out for them. And when we do try to do it, people say, whoa, like, let's,
Yeah.
you know, simmer down. This is not, you know, that's not okay. And so we can feel, I know I felt especially like, well, I tried all the things that they said and it didn't work for me. Like, why isn't it working for me? I talked about my work and tried to build my network and these different things. And it was like, hey, slow down. And so
Hmm.
again, I started to feel like, well, that advice didn't work. And that's why I wanted to sort of take a different approach at sharing, you know, what we can try.
Yeah. So if women are have being led by these limiting beliefs, what are some of the first steps to start moving out of those limiting beliefs?
Yeah. So the central thesis of my book is reframing your perspective.
Mhm.
So looking at a challenge through a new perspective and seeing, wow, there's actually so many other alternatives that might be possible. And I always like to caveat, this is not hey, look on the bright side. Like, just like, you know, hey, just think happy thoughts. It's about actually stopping, saying, okay, what are the ways in which this way I'm looking at this are holding me back? And what's a totally different way I can look at this?
Mhm.
So take, for example, feedback, right? Feedback in the workplace is something that a lot of us struggle with. It can really like kind of tap right into our feelings of, you know, not good enough, or I don't, you know, it feels like someone's criticizing us, or whatever we kind of go to thinking feedback's always bad. Sort of pausing, saying, oh, okay, another way to look at feedback is it's really just a data point of how the other person is perceiving us.
Mhm.
And person A might think we're just rocking it in our work and they love the way we're doing it. Person B may think, hey, you know, this isn't the way I would do it. And if we start to think that every piece of feedback is about us and you know who we are as a person, we get thrashed around. And then if we shift that perspective, say, okay, this is an insight into how I'm being perceived, which of these insights kind of line up with where I want to go in my career, then we can sort of sift through the noise and figure out what we want to take action with.
Mhm.
um, Another example is if we have the limiting belief around not talking about our work, or that people are going to think we're bragging or showing off, or nobody cares, or our goals are too ambitious or not ambitious enough, right? All the
All of
all the
it.
things,
Yes.
all of it. Then we don't talk about our work and nobody knows about it. So if we shift that and say, okay, this thing that I'm doing, what's my why, right? I'm, you know, I was writing, I had a lot of imposter like self-doubt around talking about the book I was writing and getting the word out about it. And first, if I don't talk about it, nobody's gonna know about it. So that was a lot of problems with that. But um, you know, reminding myself, hey, I was writing this book to help other people not feel stuck, and that it wasn't about me and people liking me, and it was about helping, help people, right? And getting people feeling inspired, and like they had some tools they could try. So that was the shift around talking about our work, is instead of thinking nobody cares, thinking, well, what's my work about? Like, what's the
Mhm.
value I'm putting out in the world?
Mhm.
And so really the tool there is reframing and stopping and saying, whenever we feel stuck, what is another way I can look at this? What
Mhm.
else might be true? What else might be possible? And these questions really shift our thinking into a more generative space where we have a lot more available to us.
Mhm. I love both of those examples you just gave. I always, with the feedback, would always say, I'm going to take it or leave. I'll listen to it all, but then I'm going to take it or leave it. That doesn't work for me.
Yeah,
I'm going to leave it. And I could just do that in my head. I don't have to verbalize that to the person who is giving me
exactly.
the feedback. And then with the talking about yourself, I get really nervous about when I'm trying to sell something. Like I'm like, oh, I have this new workbook for you. This is how much money it is. I get very nervous about that. But you're right. The thing that helps me is the reframing. I wrote this for you because I want to help you. And that's the impact, focusing on the impact. I
Exactly.
love that.
Yeah.
So I love that every one of your chapters is reframing this or that. It's the ego, goals. We talked about impact. Which one of those, when you think about all of them, which one of those do you think is the hardest for people to approach?
Ooh, I would say depending on the day, it could be any of them. I think um a couple things, and I would say I think comparison can be one that has the
Mm,
most detrimental impacts. But I also think decision making is one that's really been that I've seen show up a lot, especially as folks are navigating a career change, or all the stuff that's going on right now. Like maybe you want to move somewhere else or do something different with your life. This sort of overthinking of decisions really, really getting in our way. Where um, I've found, like, if we're overthinking making a decision, and we're overthinking, it's kind of like we end up, once we make a decision, nothing can be right, because we've
mhm,
created this like negativity bias that we're looking out for all the reasons, like, yep, I knew that would I knew this would go wrong. I knew that'd be wrong. And so and this is actually a topic that I found to be such a tough issue, that I wrote a TEDx talk and gave a TEDx talk about it this January. Cause I was like, hey, we need to figure out how to reframe this feeling of finality of
mm,
decisions. A
mhm.
feeling like,
Right or wrong.
if
Yeah.
I decide this, right, this is it. When we actually really have no idea. Decision's always a guess. We can have a really educated guess who might know quite a bit of the things that come together. But, in changing jobs, and that's something that comes up really often with overthinking decisions. We might change jobs to do a certain kind of project or work with a certain kind of manager. That manager might move on in 3 months, and we, made this whole decision around that thing. Or we stayed in a job because we like this kind of work. And then there's some priority shift, right? And so I think sort of trying to hang on to believing, if we do this, we're pretty sure what the outcome will be. That kind of gets us in trouble. And I always like to suggest to folks to separate the decision and the outcome, because if you think about why you're making a decision, maybe it's you want more flexibility, or you want to be more of a leader, or you want to be closer to family, or all these things. Those things can be true even if the outcome wasn't really exactly what you wanted.
Mhm.
Like, you're still moving closer to those goals, even if, oh yeah, I changed jobs. I don't really love this company, or I don't love, this manager. You still maybe changed to get closer to those things, and you still maybe got those things.
Mhm.
So to separate those two is a really helpful way to stop the overthinking, and thinking, especially the overthinking that, like, yep, I knew it. I'm a bad decision maker. Like, it's over for me.
Yeah. So the reframing is just separating those two things.
Yeah,
Okay.
is separating the decision from the outcome, and then also really reframing the finality of decisions. So
Mhm.
remembering we're making the right decision for right now. That's all we can do. That's all we know.
Mhm.
And then again, to focus on the decision instead of the outcomes.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that is so helpful. I don't know where we got it that all of these decisions are so final, that this is the
I
decision, this
know.
is the move, this is the job. And I talk about a lot about that on this podcast. I'm glad you brought it up because that causes a huge amount of anxiety.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the last
Right. And it's like
decision you'll ever
nothing can be
make.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
set yourself up for that. Nothing can be right in that negativity. Okay. You mentioned comparison. So let's talk a little bit about that too, because that is a
Yes.
huge one.
Absolutely. And I think, we all know that social media and stuff has made
Mm.
it worse for a lot of folks because you have insight into people's life you probably would not never thought about. Like someone from high school that sort of was kind of rude to you. You don't know what they're doing right before.
You
You
would
don't
have
have to.
never talked to them before. Yeah.
Right. You don't have to see them being successful or not. And so I think part of it is just having so much more data about things than actually is necessary, whether
Mhm.
you like it or not. And we think, oh, I don't care about that, but then we kind of take a peek and we kind of follow up. It's just too much information. And
Mhm.
so I think, and then on things like LinkedIn, when it can come to career, we can feel like, oh, everybody's doing all these things. Everyone's title is better. Everyone's this and that, moving faster than me. And so I think when it comes to comparison, especially when it's around someone, let's say getting a new job or traveling more or kind of doing something that we feel this feeling of FOMO really like punch us in the
Mhm.
gut. I like to suggest that folks say to themselves, do I even want this thing? Right. So first saying that, like, I had a colleague that he had an Airstream camper, one of those like cool looking, camper vans. And on Mondays he would show all the pictures of all his adventures with his kids and his family. And I was like, oh, I want an Airstream. That's awesome. And I thought to myself, do I really want an Airstream camper? I'm not a camper person, so that's probably not. And then the next question is, well, okay, what do I actually want? And
Mhm.
then we say, okay, no, I don't need that thing. What I actually wanted was to be a little bit more spontaneous, right? To just go for it, to get out there more, to explore a little bit more things. And then when I answer that question, I can actually do the things that are more authentic to me. So it wasn't camping, maybe it was taking a day trip somewhere. I have a toddler, like I'm not, camping for 5 days isn't really my thing. I know a lot of people do it toddlers, it works out great, but but that wasn't going to work for me personally. So I didn't need to chase his goal. I need to chase my own goal. And
Mhm.
so ask yourselves again, do I really want this? And then what is it I actually want? That, that sets us on course for what we can actually pursue. And
Mhm.
I'll say, if the answer is yes, I really do want this, then we can use this feeling of FOMO to actually signal a goal that we didn't maybe realize we had. So we might say to ourselves, do I really want this? Yeah, I do. Oh, wow. I did a lot of camping as a kid. I like lost touch with that. That's something I've really been wanting to do. Okay. Well, now I can actually pursue that as my own thing I want for me instead of, again, just kind of born out of comparison because that person has that.
Mhm. That is so important to bring into our lives because I think it is very easy to get lost on someone else's goals and
Yeah.
their feed and start you go buy an Airstream and then you're like, wait, I have a toddler and camping's not my thing. And I've been away from my house for 5 days and you end up at someone else's goal that you didn't
Yeah,
even want. It
exactly.
reminds me of my two boys. They get on these little bike things that they have. And one of them, they just want to ride back and forth, but one of them wants to race. And so he'll start racing the other one who's not in the race. And he'll be like, he's racing me. I don't want to race. And I think that I like to tell them, if you don't want to be in someone else's race, you don't have to be. You don't have to compare yourself to where they are or what they're racing. And I think we do that a lot. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
Oh, I love that example. It's so true, right? And it's always like if we maintain these lessons we learned as kids throughout our adulthood, we'd be a lot less stressed out.
I know. Oh goodness, the poor backyard races that don't want to happen. Okay, I want to read this from your book. Um, we're going to talk about the inner critic. Okay, quote. When we let our inner critic take the driver's seat in terms of our goal setting, we play it way safer than we need to. Putting ourselves out there feels like too much effort, not worth the hassle. Sadly, our inner critic says this about things that are actually very important to us, like achieving a promotion or landing a new job, providing yet another reason it's imperative we get a handle on the power it has over us. End quote. So how do we start getting that handle over that inner critic?
Yeah. So the inner critic, like it says in the excerpt, is um, this is our inner narrative that often shows up when we're on the cusp of something new, when we're a little bit outside of our comfort zone, we want to take a risk, or just when we're general purpose feeling stuck. So it's out there a lot. And when we set a goal, it kind of turns its volume up, like, oh, wait a second,
Mhm.
you're going to go outside this comfort zone. No, you're not. And so um the way we get a handle on that is first recognizing the difference between general thoughtfulness and reflection and like really negative self-talk. And
Mhm.
if we're used to that self-talk for years, decades, however
Mhm.
long, it can be really, really hard to know that, oh, this isn't just like productive risk mitigation. This is bad shit happening right now,
Right.
And um so we can tune into that by thinking, I think one way it's a little, more intensive, is to look at our moods across a day or across a week and say, when I'm feeling down, what are the things that I'm saying in my mind? Like,
Mm.
what's coming up for me? And so to look at, you could, if you're feeling really stuck, over a course of a week, chart, check in with yourself every few hours and say, okay, how am I feeling? What's my inner narrative like? And if we're that can actually just clue right in, like, oh, I'm really talking about myself really negatively. I'm saying I'm not good enough. I can't do this. So first is just really becoming self-aware to it. And then I think if you kind of quick shortcuts are to look at, well, what's showing up in that narrative. And one thing is, if we're saying always or never, that
Mhm.
can be a really good cue that we're in this sort of absolutes, negative space, right? Like, this always happens to me, I can never do it. That's another cue. And then the last thing is to tune into, well, what are the kinds of questions we're asking ourselves? So earlier I talked about the reframing questions being, what else is possible? What else can I try? The inner critic's questions are all why,
Mhm.
because the inner critic wants an explanation. So it's going to get you into full defensive mode. So why did this happen to me? Why are they doing this? Why can't I get this thing? That sends us really deep into this negative space where the only possible answers are defenses and explanations and things that don't actually
Mhm.
generate new ideas. So that's where we want to shift our questions from why to what. Why are they doing this to me? It's usually like, oh, because that other person's an asshole and they're trying to sabotage my
Mhm.
life, right?
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
the typical answer. But what might be going on with that person? Like, whoa, okay, now I have to approach this with empathy. I think, oh, well, that person is under a lot of pressure from their manager. And yeah, that person has, maybe they had school closures because of COVID, like I literally have today, and are feeling squeezed. And so when we say what, we actually think bigger. And that's another way to really quickly quiet the inner critic,
Mhm.
and shift into, again, like that space of, oh, okay, there's actually more here available than I thought.
Mhm. I like to talk about everything as a practice because if you've had this inner critic on full blast for decades, saying the same
Yeah.
stories over and over again, it's going to be hard to walk out of that. What would you, what advice would you offer to people who are like, okay, I'm going to try, but then they keep messing up and they keep going back to those why stories? Why me?
Yeah. Well, like you say, it's a practice. And so I think, building that self-awareness, is about um, checking in continually, and trying not to go days or weeks without thinking, hey, how am I feeling? What is my narrative like? And asking ourselves the question of, okay, am I looking at this through another perspective? What's another way that I can, actually, not a yes or no, am I saying, what's another way
Yeah.
I can look at this? Because it really pushes us to think about it differently. So I'd say part of the practice is building more of that regular checking in, and pushing ourselves to actually do something differently. So I also like to say that, when we reframe, it's not just like, well, let's just take like a 1 degree to like try this sort of differently, say sending out my resume with like a different instead of thanks, I wrote best, right? Like, but actually, what's something radically different that we could try? If we kept applying to jobs with this one resume, can we shake it up and highlight totally different skills? Can we try totally different kinds of jobs? Are there different stories we can be telling in an interview? Is there a different way we can approach that promotion conversation with our boss? Can we enlist the help of a coach? So I think when the part of the practice is also getting bigger in our thinking and thinking, okay, what are some things that I may feel like are totally off the table? Sometimes when we think of these really wild out there ideas, we realize like, well, it's not very out there. Like, asking someone to proofread my resume so I make sure, or give me feedback. That's not like wild and out there. But
Hmm.
when we get stuck, things that are just outside of our comfort zone can feel like completely off limits. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
another thing I'd say to do is try to think what's a big idea and potentially where can we enlist help from people?
And I think the closer we move to that, the less scary it gets.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, you said, let's see, I love this question. You're stuck, but do you need to be stuck? How can asking yourself this question help you move forward?
Yeah. So I think sometimes when we're feeling stuck, it's because we're in our comfort zone. And the thing with comfort zone, I think you talk about this a lot in the show, is it can comfortable doesn't mean we like it. Comfortable
Hmm.
doesn't mean we're happy there. It doesn't mean it's great. It
It's
means it's
easy.
the easier route, the safer route. And so like, that's where I would start is, hey, we probably never really need to be stuck. But when we ask ourselves, hey, what is it that I'm really that's really making me feel stuck? Is it that I feel like I'm not being seen or heard? Is it that I haven't been able to go after that goal? I'm in this comparison space. I'm taking feedback too personally, whatever it is. That's where we can start to focus in on, okay, well, where do I want to start some of these reframing strategies? Because it can also feel like when we're stuck, I'm stuck in every single possible way in the universe. And so
Hmm.
it's too much. It's too
Yeah.
overwhelming to know. And so I think honing in on, um, you know, well, what's the place that I'm feeling the most stuck or what's getting me the most down and sort of starting there because sometimes, all these different things are so interrelated that sometimes, if we're feeling stuck, let's say, because let's say we recently changed jobs and we feel like we didn't negotiate the best that we could and we're feeling like, oh god, like I set myself up on this trajectory and it's not the way I want to be, and then we start getting, oh, I always do that. I'll never have what I want. And then it's like snowballs into like I'm worthless. Starting with, okay, the negotiating was the thing that triggered this. Let me get better at negotiating. Let me figure out what else I can do, or when's the soonest I can have another conversation with my manager about salary, or what are ways I can take on stretch projects at work to start to show leadership to kind of prove that I'm really demonstrate I'm doing more than the numbers are showing, or is it that I need money for other reasons? Is it a side hustle thing could come into play? So when we narrow in on sort of the driving force, then we can kind of unlock that do I need to be stuck piece and focus on one thing at a time.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I love the you really, as you were asking all these questions, you were sticking to the facts instead of going off into this other world that's like, okay, I'm obviously worthless,
Yeah,
which I think we
exactly.
do. I think we can
Yeah.
easily get down that place. But I always say to my kid, stick to the facts, stick to the facts instead
Yeah,
of this whole world's against me and the school's against me. Stick to the facts. What happened and what's going on and where can you start with the solution making?
exactly.
Okay, I want to ask you the last question that I ask all my guests, which is, what is your number one tip to finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in between of life?
Ooh, yes. I gotta say it's staying present. And I think, yes, being present, it's like mindfulness. Okay, we've all heard it, but I think the more we focus on what we are doing right now, appreciating what we have right now, taking one, step at a time, the less all these other things weigh on us because
Hmm.
the feeling of stuckness is really often related to being hung up on something that happened in the past, a piece of feedback, something that we said, meaning whatever, or something we're chasing in the future. And I think we find so much joy when we can, especially those of us with kids, you and I both have kids. I mean, in slowing down and just saying, okay, here's where I am right now. Here's what I'm doing right now. We can definitely have plans and big ideas and goals and aspirations. Absolutely. And we only enjoy those things if we are present and experiencing them as they're happening. So I think being present is my biggest tip.
I love that you said that because that's what we've been talking about this whole time. If we're
Yeah.
talking about the decision making, we're either in the anxiety of the decision making or we're looking back and we're like, oh, we made the wrong decision. But just staying there in the present moment helps us feel gratitude, helps us, yeah, set those goals, but do it with the joy of the moment, I think. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Lia. You can find all of her information in show notes. And if you want to get her book, that link is in show notes as well. If you liked this conversation, would you do me a little favor and just click subscribe and rate the podcast? I would really appreciate that. And I want to thank you for being here on Happiness and Progress.